So let's go through some stuff we haven't seen about how to beat the French defense. This is some extra video. We're looking at things we haven't seen so far. So we're starting from a couple of lines from the Wiener. One of them will be the Novelty B6 now, never seen it before, or the traditional C5 main move, but with a couple of lines we haven't seen. So A3, and then bishop takes, knight E7. As we know, we play H4 now, and after knight C6, H5. Now let's make a point here that knight to f5 can come right now. This is the future of the knight. They want to play the knight in f5, does it? But this only makes sense to play when you got a queen in g4. If they play it right now, you can play g4, and then the knight has to move again. So after the knight goes back, you simply play h6, g6, obvious move, knight f3. Now queen to c7, obviously trying to go for this square after a couple of swaps. Queen c3 is a threat. You play bishop to g5. You don't care about that. For example, if they take, you take back, and there's nothing here. Okay, bishop d7 is the usual move they make to castle long. You play queen d2, and after long castle, the problem here is the reason why white has been winning this game already is that you're going to play bishop f6. The dark squares are weak. The rook moves, let's say rook e8 or whatever. You're going to play knight g5 with an attack on this pawn, and you're winning material. Besides, you've got a very strong passed pawn. And back in this position, we went to g4 and the knight going back. What if they play knight h6? Now everything is wrong here. Everything is wrong. This knight can't move anymore. That's the thing. Don't push g5. Don't take the knight. Just play rook to b1. Develop. And after black castles, you play f3. Now you've built this pawn chain. Queen a5 is the typical move they play. It's thematic and it's attacking two pawns. What to do? You play bishop to d2. So you give up this pawn, but then you play king to f2. And now this bishop can't develop without the rook infiltrating. And so let's see what the plan now is. It's bishop to b5. You want to play bishop to b5. If it was your move again, you play bishop to b5. And then the idea is to simply play rook to a1. So let's make an example. Black has to play a move. Let's say b6. To stop the infiltration of this rook and potentially play the usual bishop to a6. Fine, you take this knight, pawn takes back, and now rook to b3. Kick the queen away, and then you can play queen c1 with an attack on this pawn and infiltrating with the queen. Position evaluated +4. If black protects that, you can play rook to a3. And that ends the game. So let's make a recap. So the Wiener, and then e5, c5, attack the bishop, take, knight e7 early on, h4. Knight c6, h5. So let's look at the other line, the one with h6. Now, as we remember from previous videos, queen to g4 is the move now. This is the thematic move. And what about knight f5 now? Protecting this with this pawn, and we can't kick the knight away with g4. Okay, bishop d3, and the idea is very simple. We take this knight. That's it. So let's say, for instance, okay, let's see. If black defends the knight with the knight, which makes sense, you take this pawn, tripling your own pawns. But the thing is that that pawn cannot be recaptured. So queen a5, for instance, you play queen to b4. And I'm going to fix your pawn structure. If black declines the swap, you don't have to go into an obviously losing endgame, knight f3. Okay, knight c6 with an attack on the queen, queen f4, defending the pawn in e5. Bishop d7, developing. Now you simply take this knight. Pawn takes back, and now e6 wins the game. If queen takes you, take the bishop with check, then recapture the queen. You're winning material. So in this position, instead of knight to e7, what about king f8? It's the usual move to protect this pawn. a4. We're going to play the bishop into this diagonal. c4, attacking the bishop. How to deal with this? Take this knight. Pawn takes back. What's going on? Okay, queen f3. Putting pressure on the backward pawn. Okay, bishop e6, developing and defending the pawn. I personally really dislike playing against the French defense because everything is so blocked and boring. Bishop a3 check, king moves. And now knight to e2. Let's see what's going to happen here. We're going to play knight to g3. So queen to a5, attacking, putting pressure on that pawn, attacking this pawn, the usual move, all the thematic moves. You play bishop to d6, the pawn in a4 is defended. b5, the pawn is pinned. What are you going to do now? You can't take it, and it looks like black's going to get a passed pawn. Leave it, just castle. Pawn takes, knight to g3. G6, obviously because we double attack on this pawn. G6, simply take. And now knight to e2. Now we're going to go to f4, and from there we'll be much stronger because we'll be putting more attack on that pawn and also on the bishop. King f7. These are all best moves, by the way. All the moves that the opponent responds with are engine moves, trying to resist in a faulty variation. Knight f4, and that's going to be it. Rook a to e8, putting more defense. Rook f to b1, we're infiltrating no matter what. Remember, the g5 can never be played to kick the knight away because then you checkmate very soon. And the bishop is attacking b8, so the rook cannot be challenged. We're going to leave it there. So let's see the novelty now. Absolute novelty. We've never seen it before. Bishop b4, e5, and now b6 straight away. I've encountered this move more and more often recently, so it's time to make a video. h4, bishop b7, and now simply attack the bishop. Okay, take, and now c5. This is what they play. This is not supposed to be good because this bishop is naturally locked. So queen to g4 comes now attacking this pawn. What to do? There's two options here. One of them is the one that goes, king f8 to defend the pawn. h5. h6, stopping the arrival of the pawn. a4. Knight e7, developing. Knight f3. And after knight to f5, how to deal with this annoying structure. Every time I encounter it, I always struggle with it, so here's how you deal with it. Knight h4. Just take this knight in f5 no matter what, right? And you'll be fine. Okay, take. Everything's fine here. Queen to c7, threatening to take and then go for the pawn in c3. Usually you meet this move with rook h3, defending that pawn. Remember, you don't need to castle against the French defense. Knight c6, and now rook to g3, finalizing the pressure on that square, and that's gonna be it. There's no way to stop it. Rook g8, but then you can take this pawn. f5, but then you can take en passant, and it's gonna be checkmate soon. So back in this position, instead of king f8, what about knight t7, when they give away two pawns on purpose? Yeah, we accept them. Queen, and then rook g8, and then take the pawn. Knight c6, knight f3. Queen d7, preparing development, bishop to g5. And after castle, how is it that we've been completely winning for a while? So how is it that we've been completely winning? Well, this pawn isn't going to move anywhere. Rook h8 doesn't scare anyone. And yes, there's loads of pieces here and also in the center. And it looks like it's going to be a long game before you win. But we have a winning advantage of the h-passed pawn. So you're going to play queen d3 now. And there's nothing here, nothing. Rook d to f8 to push the pawn, but you just cannot do it. Whatever other move you want to make, it's only going to favor white. Let's see, for example, rook f8, just to make an example. Bishop e2, and after knight f5, how to deal with that? Simply g4. If you don't have a queen in g4, play g4, and you kick that knight away. The knight goes back, h5, and this is all unstoppable. The queen being harassed with c4, queen e3. You're going to play h6, h7, and then bishop f6 to stop the rook from going to h8, and that's going to be it. What about instead, straight after playing bishop e2, what about knight to a5? The idea of going to the usual c4 square. Ignore it. h5, and after knight to c4, h6. You just don't care about it. Knight to b2, forced trade of queens because basically you're attacking the knight, so the queen has to do this. And after the knight goes to c6, h7. That's it. That pawn is unstoppable, remember that. So let's make now a mention of two lines from the Rubenstein that need to be seen. So when the pawn takes and knight takes back, in the line with the immediate b6, we know we play knight f3, bishop b7, and now check. So in the variation where they play c6, you gotta play bishop c4. We have never seen knight d7 now, which is looking very solid. However, it's gonna lead to a disaster because you just play knight f to g5, straight away going for an attack. So let's see how to deal with this. What's really going on here? Let's make an example. h6 attacking the knight. Queen h5. We don't care about the knight because we're going to take the rook, and that is black's best option. We're winning the exchange. What if g6? There's two white pieces hanging. Queen h3. Still pinning. Queen e7. Ready for castling. Okay, castle. And now let's make these two examples. If black castles, Simply knight d6 check, and then we got access to f7 and we're ruling the board. If instead this gets taken, knight f7, and black says, you know, I've taken a piece, and when the knight takes the rook, I might trap the knight and then I'm up material. Fine. The queen has to move first of all. Queen takes in d4 with an attack on this bishop. What's going on here? Bishop e6, and now this is good. This is becoming tragic. Bishop g7, defending the rook so that black can take back. Okay, fine, just take the other rook. King takes back, and now bishop e3 kicks away the queen, and then the rook is coming here, and there's gonna be like 60,000 attackers to that knight. Position is obviously completely winning. So back in this position, instead of long castle, what if black plays bishop g7 straight away? Knight takes f7. Boom! It's an incredible move. What are you going to do about it? Well, queen takes f7 means knight d6 wins the queen, so king has to take. And now bishop to f4. And you'll see what's really going on here. If the bishop, let's say, takes the pawn, just to make an example. Bishop d6 attacks the queen. Queen has nowhere to go except, well, backwards here. Let's say the queen going to d8, but that allows us the infiltration on the square e6 with the queen and bishop cooperation. So queen to e8 instead, bishop back to a3 and knight d7. Good luck to black stopping this. I mean knight d6. There's no, what about queen d8? Fine, you're just gonna go here, right? Don't lose track of that. So back in this position, what about c5 now? Thematic move, just to make an example. Well, you make a check. And when the king moves, you take this bishop. And you're threatening this and you're completely winning. We're gonna drop this line there. And why not? Let's make a recap. So this, and a b6, knight f3, bishop b7. Check, c6, bishop c4. And the move knight to d7, knight to g5. So what about instead of h6, black says, you know, let's develop. I don't trust that knight. Okay, bishop to e7. Bishop to e6. What are you gonna do about it? This cannot be ignored, right? If black takes you, just take back with the bishop, and you're gonna attack on the queen. So knight f6 developing, but you just take this one with check. And obviously the knight can't take back, so the queen has to take back. But now you can take this knight for free because, you know, knight f6. So it's just absolutely horrible. So in this position, black recaptures the bishop instead. Okay, fine. Knight e6 attacking the bishop in fianchetto. Let's make an example. Let's see. Queen c8 seems to be doing everything. Check. King f7. Knight f5. And now you're threatening knight d6. You got two knights attacking there, so it's going to be a fork that wins the queen. And it's inevitable, right? It's just going to happen. Unless your opponent moves the queen, but you also have queen h5, so have fun with this. It's either you win the queen or you give a checkmate. So in this position, instead of queen c8, what about queen b8? Okay, bishop f4 attacks the queen. The queen will have to move again. Queen c8, and now here we are again. Check. What about check? What about king f8? Okay, give another check. Okay, what about... Well, king e8 means queen h5 checkmate. Whereas king f7, then you give a check with this knight. Takes, fine, take back. King moves, okay. And now check again. But this time, next move, you're coming with the queen. So it's leading to checkmate. So let's look at another novelty from the Rubenstein, and we can change then topic. Take. What about the immediate knight d7, the more boring variation? Fine, knight f3, and after knight f6, take. We've seen this extensively, but let's look at some new stuff. c3, as we know. And now, after c5, we know we have to play bishop e3, and after take, bishop d7. This is the novelty. We've never seen it before. And the thing is, you need to stop it immediately. I've encountered this in a game recently, and I had to make a video about it because the bishop is going to c6. It's going to be very strong attack here. Queen d5 is the usual move they play. You can't move the knight anymore. It's really annoying and it's loads of pressure. So you have to play knight e5 immediately. This is necessary. and you're gonna take that bishop. Just simply take the bishop and go on with the bishop pair and a majority on the queen side. So this is a terrible defense for black. Make sure you watch all the other videos to understand this perfectly. What about bishop d6, for instance? Attacking the knight. Well, remember this tactic at this point. Knight f7. Hehe. King takes. There was a fork. Bishop f6 with an attack on the queen. If king takes or pawn takes, you're still going to take here, right? So if pawn takes, which would be the best way to take, but then you take this one. And rook to g8, going on open file. Bishop to c4, putting pressure on e6. Queen e7 developing. Queen to d3, attacking this pawn. Okay, rook taking this pawn. What's going on? Castle long. And after bishop c6, finishing development, it looks like one of those positions where you might not necessarily win, even though it looks like. But you know, queen h7 check, and now rook to g7. There's an attack on the rook, there's an attack on the queen, but you're going to play queen h5 check. And this is completely winning, especially when you place the rooks on these files. The king is very unsafe. Position evaluated +5. So we might just drop it here. So let's look at a couple of lines from the Steinitz. The most annoying variation, the most boring one. So f4, c5, knight f3, knight c6. We all know this. Bishop e3. And now in the variation where they take this pawn immediately, you take back with the knight, and now bishop c5. As we all know, queen d2. And now let's look at this plan. The main plan of the Steinitz will be a6, b5, right, and then b4, and so on. So they push the pawn on the queen side, you push on the king side, h4, and after take. Obviously, you couldn't do b5 straight away because then knight takes knight in c6. So b5, h5. Now, they usually play queen b6 here to put more attack over the bishop, so you have to take. And after knight takes back, the idea they have now is to play b4. You have to move the knight, and then they play knight e4, attacking the queen. It is extremely annoying. It's also threatening queen f2. So how to deal with this? Now you play h6. You just ignore it. And now b4 cannot really happen right now because you can take in g7. Oh, and by the way, if they play g6 now to stop the pawn from advancing, you have to play b4. This is really important. You gotta stop this move of b4 if you don't have a knight that can take in e4. So let's go back here. If they play b4 now instead of g6, then take this pawn, comes with an attack on the rook. So if pawn takes knight, you can take this with check. So that means rook has to move. Rook g8, and now knight to d1. So it looks like knight e4 is now possible. Well, let's make a mention that if rook takes pawn in g7, now you play knight f2, and you're doing your job. You're attacking, you're defending that square, and after castling, you know this king is on borrowed time. It's going to be destroyed right there in the center. So what if they play knight e4 straight away with an attack on the queen? You play queen e3, and that's it. And obviously the queen trade will have to happen because otherwise you can play rook h7. You win the pawn, you protect this one, and you threaten to win the game with rook h8. So after take, now rook can finally take, and now g4. Key move to remember. You're always going to want to get active. d4 attacking the knight, you play bishop g2, ignore it. And now if, let's say for instance, well obviously if they take you, you take here, it comes with an attack on the rook. The rook moves, and now g5, and you're not losing anything. You actually, this pawn is really weak. This pawn is not going to live. And back in this position, instead of taking the knight, what if bishop b7, defending the knight, knight c4, threatening knight d6. I mean, first you're going to take this one, and then knight d6. And I don't personally see any way to stop this properly. Neither does the engine. So let's move on. So back here, we're playing against the Steinitz, bishop e3. We just played bishop e3. We gotta look at this variation that I encountered today, actually. The early queen b6 move. As we perfectly know, we play knight a5 attacking the queen, queen a5. This is still theory. c3. And when the pawn takes in d4, you play b4. And now the sacrifice is theoretical. Take, and now bishop check, bishop blocks. We've seen this in some of the previous videos. The move we need to see today is b5 straight away, which forces us to go to b2, and now bishop c3. They did this in a game against me today. Here I thought about it for half an hour until I ran out of time. I think I played... No, I'm kidding. I didn't run out of time. I did win eventually, but it was a blitz game and we both blundered like there's no tomorrow. I ended up playing queen b3, but there was a much stronger move. Knight to d4. This cannot take this one, neither this one, because otherwise you win the queen. So you can take that pawn. a6, protecting, because now we're that... Okay, if this knight moves, let's say knight c5, you just take this with check. a6, to protect that pawn. Just take this one. Queen takes back, check, queen d2 does the job. It saves everything. The queen will have to move, otherwise rook c1, knight c6 is completely over. If queen takes, king takes, we will go into a winning endgame. Knight c5 with the idea of landing in e4, rook c1, we don't care. Check, king e3, knight is trapped. Goodbye. So to conclude the video, we're gonna look at something weird actually. Now after knight c3 here, they can play f5. Now I don't think this has a name. According to Google, it's like Paul's invariation, but I'm not really sure it actually means that. But let's get to the point. I've encountered this move as well, so we have to make a video. You have to take in d5, and when the queen takes back, you take the queen, and it's game over. Jokes apart, when the pawn takes, you simply give a check straight away. And now this king will have to start dancing. Oh, and let's make a mention that this is not one of those variations where you can play king e7 and then just develop, because you can just play bishop g5 straight away, check, and you're winning the queen, unless your opponent plays the obvious knight f6, but then long castle, and that's it. This is, nothing to see here. So let's go back. After the check, they have to play g6, but now basically what you have achieved is a very weak fianchetto, but also you're going to be forcing black to play the bishop to e7. So you play a check now, queen e2. Black has to play bishop e7. It will not be able to play bishop g7, where it will be very ideally placed. They can't block with the queen, because then they drop the pawn in d5. They can't block with the knight, simply because of bishop f4. And now, if you think that the bishop can just go in fianchetto and castle, well, you're wrong, because you're going to castle, black castles, h4. Position has already been evaluated, plus 250 for a while. The thing is, this is too weak, okay? This pawn chain is too weak. You're going to play h5, and you take it from there. Knight c6, knight f3. Got all the protection that we need on that pawn. Black pieces are just too weird. They can't really develop properly, and nothing stops you from playing h5. Too many weaknesses, too many holes in the position of the black player. So back in this position, after queen e2 check, bishop blocks. Already proceed with the attack. h4, knight f6, bishop h6. That's it. You're punishing this stupid defense. Knight to e4. This is the point of playing this defense, to put the knight there, and it's really annoying. You can't play f3 because knight g3 is fooling you, so be careful. Knight h3 is the right move. Knight c6, developing, targeting this pawn. Although before we look at that, let's look at this move. Knight takes in c3. Okay, take back. And now it looks like black can just play knight d7 and knight f6 and then go to e4 and stay there unchallenged, but it's just too late. Knight g5. The knight there is threatening to trap the queen. The bishop is pinned, so after knight f6, only move bishop g7. Attack the rook, and you're gonna win this knight for free. Nothing to see here. Rook f8 will be the only move here. Black says, you know what, I'll give you the exchange, but not a piece, which is fair enough, but you play h5. You don't have to take it straight away. You're threatening to just open everything up. Rook f7 to protect this more, to attack the bishop, but now you take it. King takes back. Take. So back in this position, we just went through knight d7. What about, well, if queen to d6 here, simply bishop f4. It's just too strong. If instead, let's say queen to d7, to try and find a way to develop, king to d2 is the key move. And after queen e6, desperate for swap, queen f3. And nothing stops you from playing rook e1. This pawn chain is too safe. Black can't castle, let's say knight d7 for example, where you just play rook here, and you can take it from there. There's position evaluated +4 or something like that at this point. You can guess why. So back in this position, earlier we went through knight takes knight. What about knight c6? Queen e3, this is the key move to protect the pawn in d4. Queen d6, developing. Castle. Bishop e6, it looks like maybe our opponent will be able to castle and play in peace. However, bishop f4. And that is why the queen just cannot go to d6, which means that the light square bishop is never really going to be able to develop. Let's see. Queen to d7, fine. Knight b5. Double attack on this pawn. You can't castle. Black cannot castle because f3 and the knight is trapped. I mean, it doesn't look trapped because you can go to d6, right? But now rook e1. Finalizing this wonderful skewer. And if the bishop moves, we take the other bishop. But let's make it clear. Okay, let's make an example. Let's say if black plays a6, right, whatever. The plan here is simple. Knight takes knight, check, they take back, and then double attack on this bishop in e6, you win a piece. Goodbye. If instead they play bishop f7 to remove the bishop from the attack, and now this bishop is defended by this knight, you simply take this knight with check, and whenever you get taken, you've got the infiltration happening. If instead they just move, well, now you can take this with check, right? And then once again, you're just winning material. So back at this position, after knight to b5, long castle, as we say, doesn't work. What about rook c8, defending the pawn of the threatened fork, and now black is saying, I'll play a6 next move, and the knight will have to get out of there. Fine, attack this knight once again with f3, knight to d6, h5. Castle appears possible, but you just take. How do you go on with this? Bishop to d6. Bishop takes that. It's a bit weird. But after you get taken back, if bishop takes here, simply knight takes. And then you're breaking the pawn structure, or at least you're infiltrating over here. So here, when the bishop takes you, right, you're gonna take. The queen cannot take here because otherwise queen h6, and it's a disaster. So what if the pawn takes you, the queen remains on this rank, queen g5. And now after queen to g7, knight f4, finalizing the attack on the poor bishop. Knight to d4 appears possible, but you just take. Obviously, you were going to take here, and it was going to be a disaster. If take, then check, queen goes here, then check, queen goes here, and queen h6, threatening mate, queen blocks once again, then you take here, and you're going to have to take it from here. It's completely winning endgame, as you can see.